Zorgamazoo, chapter 11. But remember in chapter 9 and 10, Katrina and I can never remember the guy's name. What's his name? Morty met Winnie, who was a Wendigo, and she was crying because Wendigos are friends with the Zorgals, and they got her to tell them what happened. And remember, there were those beasts that came and took all the Zorgals, and they kind of looked like octopuses. She said that they're all dead, been eaten, and but I'm not sure. This chapter is called then at the very end, remember that beast grabbed them, ensnared in its terrible claws. Okay, the Menagerie Crypt. And look, there's a picture of what it looks like. Kind of like a bug / octopus. Okay, weird. Okay. My goodness, it seems that our heroes are doomed, devoured, digested, completely consumed. It's true they were eaten like pickles and pie, but to call it the end, well, no, that's a lie. Because Mortimer, Yergel, Katrina Cottrell, who were followed by whimpering Winnie as well, they all indeed had gone slithering into the maw of that ugly monstrosity's slobbery jaw. They went under its tongue and over its teeth. They slid down its neck to the belly beneath. The belly, however, was stiff as a stone, as if all of its innards were nothing but bone. Hold on, said Katrina. This doesn't make sense. This stomach has walls like the bars of a fence. It's all iron and copper and rusty with age. It's less of a belly and more of a cage. Morty wondered, scratching his head. What I'd like to know is, why aren't we dead? You're right, Winnie cried. I mean, swallowed alive. It's not the sort of thing you routinely survive. Before Morty could answer with any reply, the mysterious creature leapt into the sky, and wherever the creature was traveling to, it was far, far away from Zorgamazoo. There weren't any windows, so there wasn't a view. They just flew, and they flew, and they flew, and they flew. The trip wasn't pleasant. It was anything but, as they thumped in the creature's inflexible gut. They were shot through the air. They were thrown in a flop, with Winnie the bottom, Katrina the top, and Mortimer awkwardly crumbled between. He felt like a steak in a mincing machine. From their heads to their heels, they were queasily tossed, as if weightlessness won, the gravity lost. And gravity lost. But at last their momentum began to subside. It seemed they had come to the end of the ride. Whew, Winnie sighed. Not a second too quick. Another minute of that, and I would have been sick. It was then something happened, something no one would guess, an occurrence I frankly find hard to express. But nevertheless, it happened. It's true. It was then that the creature divided in two. It began with a creak in the animal's back, as the stomach came open by only a crack. Then little by little and bit after bit, the crack opened wide and the innards were lit with glimmers of eerie, mysterious light, confirming Katrina's suspicions were right. Instead of the beast, there were pulleys and chains where there should have been organs and muscles and veins, or at least an intestine, or maybe a spleen, but no, for the beast was in fact a machine. Our heroes were trapped like dogs in a pound, in a cage hanging over the dust of the ground. It's a trick, Morty muttered. It's some kind of scam. It's nothing but hokum and flim-flammery flam. A trick, thought Katrina? That's saying the least, but why? Who would build such a hideous beast? Before she could ponder the matter some more, on the side of the creature there opened a door. It led to a cabin where a pilot could ride, but who, thought Katrina, would travel inside? Who could build such a thing, in such odious style? It must surely be someone incredibly vile. But the man who came out wasn't wretched at all. He looked rather normal, though just a bit small. There was little, it seemed, that made him stand out. He wasn't too thin, and he wasn't too stout. This miniature man was perfectly gray, while his manner was blank in a similar way. His movements were slow, as if studied by rote. He was lacking in anything worthy of note. He seemed like a person whom, as soon as you'd met, you would hardly remember and quickly forget. A person who sadly is always ignored. If you glanced at him once, you'd already be bored. In his hands, he was holding a silvery box with gauges resembling a series of clocks. He swiveled a switch with the pad of his thumb, and the creature's machinery started to hum. The cage was brought down on a hook and a chain, controlled by a massive mechanical crane. Though Katrina was frightened, she tried to be brave. She could see they were somewhere inside of a cave. Looking down at the man, feeling helpless and trapped, she grew very angry and suddenly snapped. "Excuse me," she said to the miniature man. "Could you answer a question? I'm assuming you can. There's something, you see, that's a little unclear, so perhaps you can tell us, why are we here?" The man didn't answer. He was lost in a trance, as if he was doing his plan, as if all he was doing was planned in advance. He held up the box in his miniature fist. He toggled the dials with a flick of his wrist. The crane with a creak went winching to work. It hefted the cage with a jolt and a jerk. It lowered them down to the depths of the cave, like a coffin's descent to the base of a grave. The walls were all craggy and chalky with dust, sallow and furrowed with craters and crust. They slowly continued their deathly descent, and things became dimmer the farther they went. Then came a light. It was eerie and green. It threw lingering shadows all over the scene. And the scene, you may ask? It was bleak. It was black. There were cages piled up into stack after stack, in a room like a warehouse, endless with aisles, with cages and cages that went on for miles. They were piled all the way to the curve of the roof, and if things were afoul, then here was the proof. In every last one was a creature or beast. There must have been millions or hundreds at least. Katrina looked round with alarm in her eyes. There were creatures of every conceivable size, creatures she'd never encountered before, creatures from stories and legends and lore, creatures most people would likely reject. They're not real, they would say, or so you'd expect. But here they all were, looking hopeless and pale, locked in some sort of despicable jail. There were yetis packed in with a whiskery yeks, so crowded and cramped they had cricks in their necks. In a cage to their left was a satyr and fawn. Their shoulders were drooped and their faces were drawn. Meanwhile, the mermaids were locked in a pot, and to tell you the truth, they weren't looking so hot. There were phoenixes too, but their feathers were dim. Their fiery eyes had gone dismal and grim. But surely the worst, the saddest of all, was a creature so broad, so impossibly tall, that he needed the widest and mightiest cell, and was fitted with shackles and fetters as well. He was called the Behemoth, this thundering brute, this monstrously massive, enormous galoot. So to see him, perhaps you'd be stricken with dread, with only a glance at his elephant's head. But to look at him here, in his shackles and chains, would induce only pity and sympathy pains, for in spite of his monstrous, magnificent size, his trunk was all runny, there were tears in his eyes. It was curious that Winnie would smile as she peered down the cages at aisle after aisle, but smiling she was as she pointed her claw. "Look, it's my auntie and Uncle Macaw." So it was true, the Wendigo clan, every Wendigo woman and Wendigo man, were locked into cages and huddled in groups like curious chickens in miserable coops. And next to their cages, can you guess who was there, creatures with shorter, more whiskery hair. Who were these creatures? I'll bet you know who. It's the Zorgles, cried Morty from Zorgamazoo. They're here, he resounded. Our adventure is done. We're finished, Katrina. We found them. We won. Katrina was comically rolling her eyes. Morty, she said, a word to the wise. You might be rejoicing a little too soon. You might want to think about changing your tune. Just look at the others. They're mostly in tears. They look like they've been here for hundreds of years. And what about us? We're not doing so hot. We've been kidnapped, remember? Or have you forgot? So I hate to sound morbid or even morose, but I don't think we're finished. No, not even close. Oh yeah, Morty frowned, going suddenly glum. Well, this is the pits. We should never have come. Katrina turned back to the miniature man. Who was he, she wondered. What was his plan? Hey you, she cried out. Do you want some advice? How about kidnapping people is not very nice? The man remained mute. He said nothing at all. It was sort of like talking to bricks in a wall. You're a lout, said Katrina, and a criminal too. I'd say that you've got some explaining to do. But the man only stared. He was cold and aloof. He twisted his gaze to the curve of the roof. He flicked yet another electrical switch, and the whole of the ceiling, it started to twitch. The top of the cave, made of metal and chrome, opened up and revealed a crystalline dome. Katrina looked skyward, up through the bars. She saw that the heavens were littered with stars, and there in the distance, their planet, their home, she could see it, the Earth. Through the glass of the dome, she realized at once, not a second too soon, they weren't there anymore. They were up on the moon. The stranger peered up, looking suddenly meek, and decided at last he was ready to speak. He spoke as if listlessly reading a script. Welcome, he said, to Moonagerie Crypt. My name is Dulbert Ho-Hummer III, and you'll be here forever. I give you my word. So there's no going home. You're all here to stay. Your planet, like mine, is a long ways away, he said to Katrina. But maybe it's true. I imagine I've got some explaining to do. In that case, I'll make it abundantly clear as to why you were taken and why you are here. So that's what he did. He plunked down on the ground. He began to explain, to recount and expound. Dun, dun, dun. We'll find out tomorrow. That's what he looks like.